Hi, everybody. I hope you all did great on your Unit 1 tests. Today, we're going to start working with inequalities. So the good news is for this current unit is that the same solving steps are going to apply, but we do need to go over some details that we're going to have to do when it comes to graphing our inequalities. So take a moment, pause right now, and copy down this chart onto your notes. Now that you have this all copied, let's discuss what this chart actually is. When we're working with inequalities, you have to be able to graph them. So the first thing I want to make sure that everybody knows and understands is that this chart only works when the variable is on the left-hand side. If the variable is on the right-hand side, this entire shading column has to be opposite. So meaning, if we look at the symbol greater than, right now, assuming the variable is on the left-hand side, then that means we would shade to the right. The way the arrow points, that's where we would shade. If it's a greater than symbol, it gets an open circle, which means that number is not included. That is different from a greater than or equal to sign. Again, assuming the variable is on the left-hand side, a greater than or equal to sign means that the point is included. We still shade to the right. Now, if our variable was on the left-hand or the right-hand side, that's when we would shade opposite of whatever it's telling us. Moving down, a less than symbol tells us that the number is not included. And when we shade to the left. A less than or equal to sign tells us that the number is included. So to recap this, if you have a greater than or less than sign with no line underneath it, you use an open circle. If you have a greater than or equal to sign or a less than or equal to sign with a line underneath it, that's when you used a closed circle. We're kind of skipping around your notes a little bit. We're now going to go back to the front side. It starts by talking about this thing called interval notation. It's a fancy way of using parentheses and brackets to show all the possible solutions for an inequality. Whereas with equations, we only had one solution. With inequalities, we're going to have many solutions. So we have to show that somehow. So the first thing is you're going to use a bracket when that number is included. The way we know that number is included, just like that last chart we just did, is when you see a solid circle. Think of it as a heavier thing, solid, filled in. It's heavier, so it needs that bracket, this kind of thing, in order to fully support that circle. On the flip side, a parenthesis states that the number is not included. And just like when we did that chart, we said not included was an open circle. So a parenthesis is kind of curved. The outside edge of our open circle is also curved. That's a good way of remembering it. To recap, you're going to use a bracket when the number is included, and you're going to use a parenthesis when the number is not included. But the question comes up, what if we start talking about infinity? What I wanted everybody to know right away is when we're talking about infinity, the left-hand side is always the negative infinity side. So if you see an arrow on the left, that is a negative infinity. If you see an arrow on the right, that is signifying a positive infinity. Or some people just write infinity because it kind of implies that it's positive. The union, that's just referring to if you have separate interval notations that we're joining together. We're going to work more with that with the next unit. However, I will show you an example of a union. If you were to type 15 over 4 into your calculator, it would give you the answer of 3u, 3 over 4. What that means is 3 and 3/4. It joins them together. The way I like to think of it is 3 is engaging in holy matrimony with 3 over 4. They just got married. Okay, so let's take all these different details and put them into play. If we go ahead and look at our two examples, what it's asking us to do is to write the interval notation for these two graphs. So if we look at our top graph, number 1, we first read it like we read a book, left to right. So if we look, our first dot is at -8. So I'm going to put a -8. Because this is a solid circle and it means that the number is included, that means we're going to use a bracket. So I'm going to put a bracket before that -8. Then we put a comma. Now we go all the way to where it ends, right here at the 6. Because this has an open circle, that means it is not included. So not included, we said above, gets a parenthesis. So that is your interval notation, meaning that this graph shows all the values from -8 to 6, including -8. Let's look at number 2. Looking at number 2, again, we go ahead and we look at where our first dot was at, -8. It's an open circle, so that is our parenthesis because it's not included, comma. And then it goes all the way to the 6 again, and that 6 also has an open circle. So that's also going to get a parenthesis. In this situation, it means all the values that are graphed are from -8 to -6, not including either of those two numbers. Let's look at number 3. On the left-hand side, I have a -2. It has a colored in circle, so it's a closed circle. Closed circles get a bracket, comma. Now, does everybody see how there's an arrow on the right-hand side? Remember, we said the right-hand side is at positive infinity. So I'm going to go ahead and put a positive infinity, meaning that it keeps going to the right and it never, ever ends. You may have just seen that I wrote a parenthesis. Every single time we work with infinity, we always put a parenthesis around it because we can't put a dot on infinity. So infinities always get parentheses. The final one we're going to look at is number 4. Even though it looks like it's ending at -8, there still is an arrow showing that it's going all the way to the left. All the way to the left means negative infinity. And we just discussed a negative infinity always gets a, you guessed it, a parenthesis, comma. This goes all the way to the 4. That's where it ends with an open circle. So an open circle means, man, you're on fire. It does get a parenthesis. You are correct. All right, so now we're going to move on to graphing our inequalities. So if you noticed 1 through or A through D right here, all have the variable on the left-hand side. That makes our graphing really easy. We just start by putting 3 lines. Whatever number is part of your problem, that's the number that goes in the middle. And you ask yourself, what number comes before 3? 2. What number comes after 3? 4. And now you look at your symbol. Referring back to that chart on the top of your page, a greater than sign gets an open circle. The variable is on the left, so we shade where the arrow points. And you can always go back and check it. Okay, I shaded where 4 is. Is 4 greater than is 4 greater than 3? Yes, it is, so that I shaded in the right area. Letter B, again, we start by putting our 3 lines. -12 goes in the middle. Carefully think about what number comes before -12. It's -13. Because remember, as we go to the left, the numbers get smaller. -11 comes after. It's a closed circle, and then it points to the left. Now, these are different from E and F. With E, we start by graphing the same way. 4 goes in the middle. What comes before? 3. What comes after? 5. And we look at our symbol. It tells us it's an open circle. But because the variable is on the right-hand side, even though it's pointing to the right, we're going to shade opposite. We are going to shade to the left. And you can double check it. We shaded where the 3 was at. So is 4 greater than 3? Yes, it is. So that means we shaded the right area. Letter F is the same idea. Put our 3 lines. -17 is in the middle. What comes before? -18. Good. What comes after -16? Make sure your numbers are in the right order. Less than or equal to is a solid circle. Again, our variable is on the wrong side. So even though it's pointing to the left, we actually shade to the right. When we plug in our 16 negative to make sure it applies, is -17 less than or equal to -16? It sure is, because remember, with negatives, the bigger the number gets, the smaller it actually is. The final part of today's lesson is talking about writing an inequality from a graph. So if you look here, you first get to pick a variable. Well, I'm going to pick a W for whippers. So here's a W. My dot is at -1. It's a solid dot, which means it gets a line. So there's a line underneath it, and it's pointing to the right. So I drew my arrow pointing right. Letter B, again, I'm going to pick a W for whippers. My dot is on the 4. This time it's open, so there is no line. It's pointing to the left, so I draw my sign pointing to the left. Letter C, again, I'm going to choose a W for whippers. -3 is where my dot is. Again, it's open, and it's pointing to the left, so I do not need a line, and it points to the left. The final one, letter D, a W for whippers. My dot is on 0. It's solid, so I do go ahead and do a line underneath my symbol. It's pointing out the door, so I draw my symbol pointing out the door. I hope you guys all enjoyed today's lesson. Feel free to go back and rewind if there's something that you missed. And then you guys can go ahead and work on your classwork. Okay? Thanks. Have a great day.